And welcome. My guest today is Dr. Owen Anderson. He is a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University, where he's taught for over 2 decades. His work focuses on philosophy of religion, epistemology, metaphysics, and Christian theology. Dr. Anderson is also an author, pastor, and public intellectual, and adherent to the study of jujitsu. And he argues that philosophy must be grounded in biblical revelation rather than secular frameworks. He has written extensively on natural law, the nature of truth, the limits of skepticism, and what he sees as the failures of the modern secular thought. He's a frequent speaker and podcast guest known for defending a Christian worldview within secular academic institutions and for his critiques of relativism, nihilism, and materialism. 3 words that I think I've got my head around. I love philosophy, but I'm still working on it. But that said, you've got some books. Why don't we do a plug for those books? And welcome, Dr. Owen Anderson.
I'm really glad to talk with you today. And that guy sounds interesting. Where was you're reading about there? I want to talk to him. I've got a couple books. I've got different kinds of books out. So some of them are scholarly books with presses like Cambridge University Press. And they're interesting, I think, but they're not really mass market topics. So one of those is about the natural moral law. Can we know anything about how we should live just by reason and the world around us? And then another one is about the First Amendment and what is it protect? That's with the Cambridge Companion series. So if you go on the Cambridge University website, there's a bunch of Cambridge companions to anything you would want. They've got Cambridge Companion to music, right? So they got a Cambridge Companion to the First Amendment. But then I've got more popular books that I write for a larger audience that aren't as technical about things like God's existence. And my most recent one was about the biblical character Samson, who most people only know him from the Samson and Delilah story. So I kind of go through his character, his life, and in that book, I do 2 things. I kind of save him from the American movie industry, who presents him just as this roided up figure who can break stuff, and instead show that his place in the Bible is as a type of Christ. He's pointing to who Christ is. And then secondly, how does he approach conflicts? So he's got a number of interesting steps of how Samson approaches conflicts, not just a huge roided up guy. In fact, there's no reason to think he was a huge muscle guy, because the point of the story is not that he's super strong, but that the Spirit of the Lord was with him. So if he's super strong and that's why he's doing what he's doing, then he doesn't need the Spirit of the Lord. And so those are some of what I do. I'm also on X, Dr. Dr. Owen Anderson, and on Substack, same thing, Dr. Dr. Owen Anderson. You'll see my picture there. And my Substack might be of interest because what I do there is I'm, as a conservative Christian in a state university and in the philosophy department, humanities department, but as a philosopher, I'm kind of a rare thing. Whether you agree, you might say I'm not a conservative Christian, but it's still sort of like, well, how'd that guy exist? You know, you go to the zoo and you see an animal, like that animal's strange animal. It's got a bill, but also fur. What is that thing? Right. So my Substack's about reporting from the inside, basically. What's the kind of stuff that goes on in faculty meetings and classes? Because it'd be a good. I've thought about doing stand-up comedy. I'm a little bit of a sense of humor also. I don't take myself too seriously, so I can poke fun at myself. And I thought, man, I could probably get a stand-up bit out of all this.
Hey, you know what? I can make that happen for you. And you're not so far away because you're in Arizona and I'm in LA.
Yeah.
We'll bill you as the
I've got family in LA, so I go out there often.
Academia.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, like I thought about a few different approaches, right? Like the Seinfeld observational approach, but also something like you might be a conservative philosopher if approach, you know.
Sounds good. I grew up so Catholic that my father was Opus Dei. That's where I'm coming from.
So I thought they were monastic, though. I thought they weren't allowed to marry.
Well, he attended the meetings, and you know, there was a group of men in Massachusetts who had Opus Dei meetings. I guess he wasn't the strictest of adherents, but he was.
Otherwise,
he was over the top. So that was my religious upbringing. But the first thing that struck me as interesting when I was looking at your media sheet, and it seems to me that it must be absolutely a new frontier of philosophy, is it said that Dr. Owen Anderson discusses the philosophy of AI.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even know that was a thing, but AI is something that both scares me and interests
Mhm.
me at the same
Yep.
time. I think everybody's sort of in the same boat. So, what is the
Yeah.
philosophy of AI, and what is your philosophy of AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. And just it's really important to capture for a moment what you just said about what your feelings are. It scares me and fascinates me. Now that's going to mean that you look things up on social media or the news. So this is one of the things I point out about what we call AI right now is the media work behind it to make everybody have the feelings you just mentioned so that we're looking it up. It becomes a thing. It's a top, on the top 10 trending on Twitter or Yahoo or wherever. Guess who benefits from that? Well, the owner of ChatGPT and similar, right? So that's part of what we'll talk about now is like how did this get so important in the last couple of years? What is it? And where's the money? Follow the money behind it. But real
Yeah.
briefly, just about myself, also my university for your audience, Arizona State University is the largest state university in the country. We have about 195,000 students, and we're basically Southern California junior, meaning we advertise to all the students that didn't get into UCLA. Well, we're a third of the cost. And so if you're in SoCal and you're watching, daytime TV, you're going to see ads for Grand Canyon University, which is the local Christian school, and Arizona State University, because we're both trying to get Southern California students on the affordability argument. But we've also positioned ourselves to be a leader in AI and education. So we're trying to be on the cutting edge of whatever this cutting edge thing is. And so what I've done is I've been part of a program called the AI Challenge for the last 2 years at ASU, which is a challenge from our provost. The provost is the person in charge of all the faculty, whereas the president of the university is the person in charge of all the business side. So the provost is like our top of the top boss, and she said, "Hey, I want people to figure out how to use AI in their different fields because obviously it will have different impact for accounting." Well, AI, that's great. That's well, not for accountants; they're kind of worried, but for the rest of us, boom, that's one thing, just crunchy numbers. But especially over here in the humanities, which are subjects that study the human condition, like philosophy, religious studies, history, literature. Where does AI fit in? Isn't that kind of weird? So I did something called the AI dialogues for the last couple of years, and I don't know if you've done this or your audience has done this, but in my circles, including with young students, 18 and older, they like to go on to something like chat. I'm going to just say chat as a generic uh, AI, but
I'm guessing
Grok,
the kids are saying that now too.
whoever. Yeah, it's kind of the word like Coca-Cola. You can say, "Give me a Coke,"
Yeah.
and someone hands you a Pepsi or a generic cola. You understand? Right? It's
Yeah.
Coke. So chat's kind of like that. We don't really say, "I went to Grok," but it might be Grok's better. So I'm not plugging either one.
Right.
So, but what we do is we go on there and say, "Well, I want to argue." Because at least as philosophers, your family, you exhaust your family and friends pretty quickly with philosophical arguments. They see you coming. And, oh no, he's gonna ask if we have free will again or not. Let's look busy. But the AI, the computers never sleeps, never gets bored. You can have dialogues with it. And so in philosophy, one of the core things that we read are the Platonic dialogues, where you have Socrates. They're written by Plato, Socrates' student, but they're about Socrates having debates with different Greek philosophers. And so I set up a system in my classes, an assignment where they basically use chat as the dialogue partner. And then they do a couple things. We might have a prompt like tell chat that it is to respond to you as if it is Aristotle. And that's one thing chat can do pretty well because the works of Aristotle and similar philosophers are for free online. And so there's no copyright issues. And so that's the first thing, the prompt. The second thing is have a dialogue about this question. So the different questions for different assignments. So for Aristotle, it might be what is the highest good? What does Aristotle think? And so then you go through a dialogue, just like the Platonic dialogue, and the students kind of asking questions that come to the student's mind, meaning each of these is different for the students. It's not a pre-programmed thing because each of them will end up in different paths based on what they ask chat. And then the final part of it is evaluate how well did chat do representing Aristotle, which means you have to know Aristotle, at least what I've assigned in the class, in order to tell me, the instructor, how well did chat do. Because chat's not perfect. There'll be things, well, this didn't sound quite right or whatnot. So I've been doing that for a couple of years. The students really like it. It's a little bit harder to cheat on it. That's one thing we could talk about is AI and education and cheating. And
Yeah.
so that's one thing I thought about this is this limits it a little bit. There's still ways you, basically with cheating, what you want to do, just like with counterfeiting a dollar bill, you want to make it so that counterfeiting a dollar bill costs more than a dollar, right? Because otherwise it's a worthless counterfeit, then and you just get a dollar, it costs $1. So if with cheating, you want to make it so it costs the student more than just studying, right? Or by cheating, in the process of cheating, they have to study the material. And so my assignment is kind of based on this idea. They in order to cheat on this, how are you going to do it? You're going to have to get chat to answer questions about Aristotle, and then have chat tell you, I guess, what is the did I do a good job of talking like Aristotle? So the students have really liked it, and that's one of the ways I'm saying, look, we could use AI in our classrooms as a
Right. And that
humanist,
makes
as a philosopher.
because they're going to use it anyway, so
Mhm.
might as well incorporate it into the lesson.
Mhm. Yeah,
As you were
that's really what
talking
you
about
just said is key for education is they're going to use it anyway. So
right,
pretending like we're going to just live it like, hey, let's just hunker down, don't talk about it, it'll go away in 5 years. This is not one of those things.
right. Would smaller class sizes be part of it where there's more dialogue with the teacher, where there's less written assignments that they have to do outside of the classroom? Would that also be a solution since this is something you think
Well, yeah,
about?
that's always a solution that we want, philosophers want,
Yeah,
but that's the solution no administrator at schools like ASU wants,
right.
because for them they're looking at money, the bottom line. So there's always a conflict between the humanities professors and the administration. How many students can we fit into your classes? Stop overloading our classes. So for me, yeah, 20 or less is ideal because we're talking about a Socratic dialogue. I want to know all their names and be able to call on people and talk. And 20 is a pretty big group already, but that's about the high end. But I never get that. In fact, the just 2 years ago, our director of our school said every 100 and 200 level humanities class will have 60 students. And so that's part of what the AI stuff is for, is that's kind of the end of a humanities class. What you're telling me is you're not going to offer the students of ASU humanities education because in 60 students, they're not getting what you just described. And that's really sad.
Right.
But AI might be a way to provide that a little bit for some of them.
Yeah. Um, as a philosopher that studies the human condition and the human mind, though, are you able is part of your study to project where we're going with this? Where you think that what do you think
Yeah.
it will be like to be a human in a world where AI has
Yeah.
sort of reached its full potential, which I imagine it's
Yeah.
not at yet?
Yeah, that's a great question because that gets back to the feelings that you mentioned at the beginning. A little bit afraid, but a little bit interested. What is this thing? So let's look at the marketing for things like chat, large language model computers. Uh, well, the marketing is this is AI. This is artificial intelligence. We just hit what's called the singularity, which is the point where a program goes from being a program to being conscious. And that
We hit that?
news, no, that's what they're saying. That's what the news
Oh,
is
oh,
saying.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, it goes from there's a few companies like Chat to articles start hitting the news. We've done AI. We're there. Well, what happens? Traffic to Chat skyrockets. Why? Because people are afraid and they're fascinated. Does it matter if that's true or not? No. That we've done some great breakthrough? No. All that matters to the companies and to their stockholders is you're now on your device looking up what is Chat GPT. This thing is crazy. I can't believe we've hit AI. Well, okay, we're not. It's not AI. It's like an advanced search engine,
Yeah.
and we're basically at the top of that. Is what my engineering friends tell me. In other words, this is as far as we can go right now without huge breakthroughs. And even where we're at right now is costing us so much electricity that Elon Musk is now proposing we have energy centers in space to try to make the electricity for the AI that we all want. So AI is not something that we should kind of mythologize and think this is something from T2 or some other sci-fi. But at the same time, it does automate a ton of jobs that right now we need humans to do, but they're very repetitive jobs and they don't require human creativity. They don't really inspire humans. And because of that, they're jobs that people generally don't want to get, but they might get into them because they offer good salary or stable healthcare or something. But I mentioned, like, for example, accounting. I'm not putting down accountants. We all need them. But suddenly you've got a computer that does that really well. And it's not just like autofilling a form, because we already had that, but it can anticipate lots of things about your personal business, for example, and recommend things to you the way an accountant would. So that does two things. Those of us who couldn't afford a CPA, we just kind of fumble through our taxes and our investments ourselves. Well, now we've got a computer that does this stuff, can answer questions. And then on the other side, for people who are in the accounting profession, now what? Well, it shifts it a little bit. So the accountants aren't going to disappear because you still need an expert with human eyes on the AI because they make a ton of mistakes. That's the other thing. But so that's not going to go away.
But it seems
But
to me
that
you would need
shifts.
less experts with human eyes on the AI than you would need accountants. It seems
Yeah,
like
well,
it
that's the thing. It
certainly
shifts it.
limits the number. Yeah,
It shifts it from like the entry level all of a sudden disappeared because the computer does that, and the mid level of expert does get smaller, but more expertise because now you go from I got to know accounting and I got to know computer programs like chat, and so that becomes a specialized job that will still probably do very well, and that's across subjects like computer science. For those of us in the university, we would tell students for the last 25 years, hey, I love philosophy too. I don't blame you for wanting to be a philosophy major, but do your parents a favor and also pick a successful major to go with it. And the one we put in there is like computer programming, right? Well, that just got blown up.
that's gone.
Now, well, it's not gone. It's the same model I just said, though, right? Where, yeah, that entry level, boom, but the
Right.
middle level is going to need experts because, again, it messes up. You're going to have human eyes on it to double check it. But it just shifts then the workforce. So that's going to happen in education. What everyone's seeing right now, what you're seeing right now on my screen, an AI could make it and it will look just like this. It's not a cartoonish video. It will look just as if I'm speaking to you.
Right.
And they could say what I told chat to do about Aristotle, they could do about Owen Anderson because I've got public stuff out there. Talk as if you're Owen Anderson. And now ASU doesn't have to pay Owen Anderson retirement, healthcare, have an office building that's air conditioned, all that savings because you've got a computer who can teach my 101 classes through Zoom or something. And the students may not even know because the video is perfect. The audio sounds like Owen. And so that's
Right.
in education, that's going to come up too because administrators who want to save money are going to be looking at that like, yeah, this is kind of nice.
Who's going to spend the money if no one's got a job?
Well,
See,
yeah, well, that, yeah,
this gets
what'll
into the
those do, right? So
philosophy of
that's,
government, where this sounds like a place where regulation and government would have to step in at some point because, and I'm sure this is something somebody with a philosophical background has looked at, the nature of man and greed,
Mhm.
that giving Elon Musk carte blanche or Peter Thiel or anybody like that, they're just going to do for themselves and they're not going to
Mhm.
do for mankind. And they've got no problem with AI taking everyone's job. Jeff Bezos
Yeah.
probably has no problem with robotics taking all those warehouse workers and drivers' jobs.
Yeah.
So then we end up with, well, what is the role of
Yeah.
everybody else other than
That's
the
exactly
top
it.
0.001%?
Yep. No, that's right. I think yesterday, because of what Elon Musk was saying about his space energy generators, that he hit $600 billion in his net worth because people
Yeah,
are like, whoa, SpaceX, that's going to go public next year. It's going to be like $1.5 trillion public offering, like the biggest imaginable so far. And that puts Elon like within striking distance of being the first trillionaire.
yeah,
So yeah, you've got all this money. That's why I said the marketing behind AI is misleading to drive this interest to justify those spending, right? That spending, but it's over promising in some things. Because again, I think those of us who are not specialists in computer stuff, we're dreaming about T2 coming back from the future as an AI, like Skynet sending robots back, and it's not it's not Skynet, it's nothing like that. I asked an engineer friend of mine, like, should we be worried? Is this going to cause problems? Can it automatically like take over parts of the government? And he said, whenever you have questions like that, look at your engineer friends. And so see if they're worried, see if they're panicking. Don't listen to like sci-fi on Twitter. And the engineers know the limits of this thing. But what you just brought up is an important question. And I think it gets to really to a core American doctrine,
yeah,
which is humans do bad stuff.
yeah.
And that means the more money and power they get, the more bad stuff they can do. And we need checks and balances on each other. And there can never be power just isolated into one person who says, trust me, because none of us is trustworthy. So I think what you're getting at is a really good principle, a core American value that we need to never forget, separation of powers, and then also checks and balances. And so, how does the government then relate to the private sector on this issue? It's not the first time we've seen this. People forget about how important railroads were and the robber barons of the railroad age. There's things like this that happen in the last 200 years where a new technology produces super ultra wealthy people, and the government has to kind of watch this and say, well, we want free market, we want ingenuity, but we don't want monopolies where you're fixing the prices.
Right. But answer me this, because this is a thought I keep having, and you might be the perfect person to ask. It seems to me, though, that they you could certainly make an argument that they didn't invent AI, that the first technology started when the first person sharpened the first stick,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
we've been building on that ever since. And all of our ancestors have sweat and toiled and died in factories and pushed mankind to the point that we're at. And they didn't invent that technology. They didn't invent
Yeah.
the computer. They were just the last person to put the last piece of in the puzzle that created AI. And it seems very wrong to me to then say they own it. It seems to me that we all kind of own it because we all suffered to get mankind into the 21st century to the point where we could have something like AI.
Mm-hmm.
And that
there's a collective side. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, though,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a collective that happened that got us to this point, and that it's foolish to say that it is their invention in a sense. You could directly accredit all the computer engineers throughout the 20th century who they built upon, but you could also point at every human being and say that we all toiled to get us to this amazing place technologically.
Yeah.
And how do we correctly apportion credit to that? I'm not saying that you split it even. I'm not even saying that it would be a 50-50, but I'm saying that there should be some accreditation to everybody who was part of this human experiment that got us to the 21st century and these amazing advancements.
Yeah, in other words, crediting the uniqueness of humanity, because you don't see the giraffes doing this. So that will get us directly into the question of, okay, so what is this thing? Is this artificial intelligence? So what is it to be a human? Can it take over humans? So we don't even need humans anymore. We could just switch over to being computers. So I think those are some of the interesting philosophical questions. There's always kind of like a point person, the CEO or whatever the position is, that gets the credit in the news, right? So you're going to talk about Elon Musk rather than let me read through 100,000 names of software engineers who also worked on this. It all kind of gets associated with him, and he ends up making a lot of the money. But that gets to a good question too: is what benefits does AI give us? And I like to make a case as a philosopher that it can't help us with the most important questions, or at least not the way it's going to help us with automating jobs. So AI, what can it do for us? Well, it takes away some toil in life, like adding up long lists of numbers of receipts is really boring, and no one wants to do that unless they're paid well. AI will do it now in a split second, and probably that's a pretty accurate job for AI. It doesn't require AI to do any hallucinations to get the number. So those jobs get taken away so that humans can do what? Well, the humans can now focus on uniquely human tasks, because that wasn't a uniquely human task. The abacus could do that as well. In fact, I remember the computer software philosopher I was looking at recently, but he said, you can do everything we do on computers on a giant room of abacuses. It would take forever, but it's the same technology, which goes to your point, right? From the abacus, because you said the pencil, which is true too, but from the abacus to the computer, it's a line of technology. But what about being a human? Well, this shifts us from those repetitive jobs to being freed up to do the uniquely human jobs, which is ask things like, what's the point of my life? What's the purpose of it? Is it fair that Elon's a 60 billionaire and I'm going paycheck to paycheck, whoever it is
But
that
unless
really
you're
fair?
Owen
So
Anderson, not a lot of people getting paid to ask these questions about what is the nature of being a human being.
And then that raises the question, well, can you even be paid for these kind of things? Like the philosophers you think of that did this, Socrates died in debt. His last words were to a student, hey, remember to pay back that rooster that I owe so-and-so. And then he died.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, money, we like it. It does a lot of good stuff, but can it really help us with the most important things? And there's lots of cautionary tales from the artists about, no, it really can't. The rich die alone, unhappy, just like the poor can. The things that you want out of life aren't money things.
Yeah. I don't know that Socrates did die alone or unhappy, though. From what I
No,
understand, he
he did.
died
That's what I'm
amongst
saying.
friends, and he kind of
Yeah.
took that hemlock without
Yep.
hesitation. They brought it to him, and he was like, down the hatch,
Yeah.
like no hesitation.
Yeah. I wasn't worried about death because
Yeah.
and he had three options: live in Athens and stop talking about philosophy,
Yeah.
move to another city like Thessalonica and could do whatever you want there. But he knew, well,
As Credo suggested to him, I
yeah,
believe.
they're even less philosophical there. So I'll be arrested immediately there also. So I'll just go through the
Yeah.
same process there or die. And he couldn't do the first two options. So yeah, he faced death and he had friends, like you said, around him. But that's kind of to the point, which is that a good death and a good life, there's not a one-to-one connection with money. I'm not saying money's not in the mix. For example, how you earned it and then how you spend it
Yeah.
matter. Did you lead a good life? You spent all your life, all your money on booze and fentanyl. Well, that wasn't a good life.
Definitely not. But as a philosopher, just I am curious because I know you're conservative and a philosopher. Do you think there's a role for government at some point, regulation, to say that there is some sort of collective there? Because
Yeah,
it seems to me that we've crossed some sort of Rubicon where you could make a million arguments against communism. I'm not a communist. I'm a lefty, but I'm not a communist or even a socialist necessarily. I think that word gets misused very often. But the fact of the matter is, I feel like we're crossing some sort of Rubicon where maybe we have to discuss a collective.
yeah. Well, I think so. Within the, I'll call it the American spectrum of left and right. So outside that spectrum on the left is uh, communism and totalitarian socialists. So that whether it's the international socialists, which is communists, or the national socialists, which is Nazis, that's the way over here. You use the government tyrannically. So the American left is left, but it's not over there. And the American right is here, but the further to the right is things like absolute anarchy, no government at all. It's only there like for
Yeah.
very minute things, like maybe prosecuting murder, but that's
Libertarianism of
it.
some
Yeah.
degree. I
So,
will point out that I've not seen Nazism put on the left before.
mm,
National Socialism just has
oh
the
yeah,
word socialism in it, but most people who take an honest look at that say that that is a movement of the right, and that
yeah,
the socialism was a term popped in before Hitler. The group already existed, and it was just a popular term at the time that they used, but there wasn't any real socialism involved in the National Socialist governance.
yeah. Well, the reason why they're over here is this is why whenever you hear someone talking about how bad the Nazis are, that any American conservatives a Nazi, you can say to yourself, I'm going to Vegas to bet that guy's a Marxist, a self-described Marxist, because those guys hate each other. And so if you're a Marxist, your big boogeyman's the Nazis. And if you're a Nazi, your big boogeyman's a Marxist. And for the Americans, we say, yeah, you're both wrong. The reason they're both on the left is they want a tyrannical government to rule every aspect of your life. And the
Right.
Americans
That
say
sounds more
no.
like the horseshoe model than to put them both on the left, in my opinion.
Well, the
They're
way that they're
close to each other.
socialist
They're
is that,
almost touching, but one is the far right, one is the far left. But of course, the horseshoe wraps around and puts them darn nearly next to each other.
well, yeah, on that point. So I guess it depends. The reason why people might say they're conservative is they'll say, well, this is Germans going back to German folk religion.
Yeah.
And so that's conserving something in folk religion. But outside of that, nothing in German folk religion had a strong centralized government that controls all the business in the country and gets rid of everyone else who lives in the country they don't like. None of that was in German folk religion. So the use of tapping into that uh, spirit of the age by the National Socialists was in order to get what they wanted, which is a powerful centralized government. So that's the key. That's the similarity I'm landing on, which is an American conservative always says limited government, less government. We don't want it. And that's why I put on their side. The further to the right of that is a kind of extreme libertarian anarchy, which you'll find out there. And so maybe a good example of your horseshoe would be Foucault and Chomsky. They have a debate on YouTube, I think from like 72.
I think
It's
I've seen that.
grainy film and one. It's really funny. But that's what they're basically arguing. Chomsky's saying, I want bigger government to regulate stuff. And Foucault's arguing for like a super decentralized, almost no government at all. That might be kind of your horseshoe thing.
I also came
But
across
anyone
an
who says, I
account of
want a
Foucault
tyrannical government
taking
that,
acid in the desert, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if
yeah,
you've
I
come
know.
across
Well,
that.
no, yeah. Yeah. He had lots of reasons that came out after his death for wanting, because it was also in sexuality and crime. No interference with anything you do.
Right.
So
Wow.
Lots of
Yeah.
things that came out later.
Well, without jumping the gun, Chomsky might have some pretty weird skeletons in his closet as well. I don't know if you came across the Epstein pictures, but
Yeah, right. Is that nuts? Like,
he- yeah,
yeah,
and with Steve Bannon,
yeah.
who
Well,
then they both demonized each other in public, but now there's pictures of them hanging out with Jeffrey
yeah.
Epstein together. This is not that podcast, but just because you mentioned it,
It's
wow.
interesting precisely because it does get to this topic we're talking about, which is the presentation we have in the media is not reality. So these two are enemies on Twitter and they argue or something, but they probably know I make a lot of money, the person speaking, not Owen Anderson, by having a Twitter feud. Let's keep it going behind the scenes. Hey, this is great, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
all that stuff's acting and fake. We don't really want to get really to the reality of it. We'd have to look past this. So maybe these kinds of things tell us about a little bit more what's going on. But so anyway,
Yeah.
either way, all I was bringing up the spectrum was not to decide the matter, but to say it sounds like you're within that American one, which says there is a government, though it does have a purpose, and one of the purposes is to protect the abuse of human rights given to us in our Bill of Rights. And when you get corporations that can manipulate the economy, that's a problem. And the government has to look into that. Now, here's the principle. I think it's a conservative principle that intuition operates on, which is that if you're using public resources, you're accountable to the public.
Yep.
So if there was some way where you could go, a corporation went somewhere and had land and used no other, everything was completely self-contained, got their own water, make their own electricity, and doesn't require anyone else, then yeah, they're outside of the government in some sense. However, where are you getting the land from? Well, it's in
Yeah.
Montana. Well, you're protected by the U.S. Army. That means,
Yeah.
do you pay for that protection? You need to. Okay, well, we'll find a South Pacific island. Okay, but then you have no protection. We're not guaranteeing you naval protection, army protection, airport protection, nothing. So everyone's still using some resources, and corporations want the protections of the American government, not just the army, but our court system.
Right.
That you can take people to court, and it's a stable court system. You're not going to get that in most of the countries in the world.
Plus,
So as soon as a
we paid to
corporation
educate
wants
your
those,
workforce.
Mhm.
We paid to educate your workforce more likely than not if they went through public schools. They
That's
ate
another one,
clean
yeah.
food that we paid to have inspected. They drank clean water that we had cleaned. So yeah, therein is
That's
where
another
I
one,
see the
yeah.
responsibility of corporations.
Yeah, so people, so for example, in First Amendment studies about freedom of speech, this comes up with the people who want to be like extreme anarchists, and they would say, well, a shop owner should be free to sell to whoever he wants, and stop you at the door and say, no, I don't actually sell to Christians. You need to go do business elsewhere.
Yeah.
And this is the same argument I point out. Well, sure, but as long as they use their own roads and get their own electricity, but if they're getting roads paid for by the taxpayers, which is a pluralistic taxpayer base, they got to serve all the taxpayers, and that's what the Supreme Court decides. So that's not me like making that up. That's where law is at. You can't select who you'll do business with if you're using public goods to provide the business. So that like gets ratcheted up on steroids about AI, because they're having to build like new nuclear power reactors to get their own electricity because they need so much. Yeah, all that's requiring United States infrastructure. And are you paying for that? Are you supporting that? Are you developing that? I think all those are really good arguments and they're not anti-conservative arguments. Like I would make the case they're based on conservative principles about what the government's supposed to do.
Right. And I guess just to put a button on the AI thing, though, I feel like these are the same arguments that are going to have to be made for AI, because as I think you guys have something similar in Arizona. I know that I have friends back east that don't really know what I'm talking about when I'm like, every other car I see on the road is driverless. So get ready, because every Uber driver is about to be out of business. And guess who's right behind them? The truck drivers. And I got bad. I mean, as a touring both musician and comedian, I mean, it really, when you tour, it really cements just how many truck drivers there are out there. I mean,
it's
that
not.
is
Yeah,
significant.
I-10. A couple times a year, I'll drive I-10 from Phoenix to LA, and it's nuts because you're basically dodging semi trucks who are trying to like leapfrog ahead of each other just to be leapfrogged ahead of their guy. They're taking both lanes. Yeah, it's crazy because you're also driving parallel to the railroad, and one railroad diesel engine can pull a mile worth of cars. There's whole fights about how the railroad is now almost non-existent in shipping, and trucking's increase. Those are political fights that we had after World War II. So that's interesting stuff to say, yeah, why don't we go back to railroads and all of the efficiency of the railroad and shipping all these things instead of using roads and trucks? But I think that that's a good example where Uber took out taxi drivers and taxi companies, right? No one says anymore, oh, let's get a taxi. They say, let's get an Uber.
Yeah.
And so then it could be AI takes that out. One model that was spoken about for Teslas is moving away from owning a car. And there's actually a Chinese company that does this already. So this could be a model that begins used in major cities. You don't own a car anymore. You pay a subscription fee. All the Teslas go to sleep at some hub. And then your subscription fee at 6 a.m. wakes this Tesla up and it drives to your house. So it's there by 7. You get in it and it drives you to work. And then it goes back to the hub. And then at 4:30, another Tesla wakes up and drives to your work. So it's there at 5 and drives you home. And then it goes back to the hub. And now we're not in a car ownership. We're in a subscription situation with whatever company. Because you might say, well, I only go to my office 3 days a week, so I don't want to pay the full subscription. So you got all these new models that'll come out about how you pay for this thing. And that would disrupt entire industries. Insurance industry has changed, right? That traffic would be changed, how traffic works, because now you could automate all the lights in a certain way so that the Teslas are all obeying this thing and they all cooperate because they all speak to each other.
It's traffic, almost certainly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If everybody,
I think about being on the 405.
The same central processing. Yeah.
If there's not an existentialist novel about how the 405 is hell, there should be one. Right? It's just nuts. It's just like a parking lot for 24/7. And so you're able to like get AI involved. So those are changes we say, hey, that sounds great. But now, yeah, is it a monopoly based thing when there's only one company that has a subscription to it?
Right.
No one's going to get up to Tesla level.
Where do all the Uber drivers go? Where do all the truck drivers go? This is where I'm saying that I feel like that there is a role for regulation and government at some point, because we can't step on the neck of progress. But at the same time, as living in LA and just being tied into the wider world because of the internet, I know we're dealing with homelessness crises.
Mm-hmm. Same here in Phoenix.
Yeah, nationally. I saw some footage from Portland just last night I was watching, which was they have a mental health crisis up there as well, a drug crisis as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like nobody benefits if we expand that, I don't want to become South Africa in a sense where you hear about gated communities and super rich people have flamethrowers under their cars because, somebody, I'm not making this up.
James Bond car.
Yeah, it's true that they will have a car because carjackings are so rampant that they hit a button if somebody approaches the car and it shoots flames to get them away. I mean, I don't think anyone wants that world.
So, that's directly out of a dystopian sci-fi movie, right? Yeah, I think that's true. But I mean, I've done some volunteer work with homeless people, and people who are involved in that industry know there's not like I think sometimes on the outside you think, oh man, if that guy just got one more opportunity, he would turn his whole life around. So it's not like that. There's a lot of complex issues that go into it. So you can't just say, hey, let's offer some free tuition to the local university and then people will shape up. But you're suggesting the other side of it, which is true. We don't want to add to it, that's for sure, and give incentives to that. So the way that the CEOs market this, and I'll say it, then you and I can critique it if we don't agree. I think is his name Jack Ma, who's in charge of the Chinese equivalent of Amazon?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's up there like top 5 most wealthy people in the world. And he was giving a talk about this, people's fear that technology will replace them and create a dystopia. And he said, look, my grandfather was a Chinese farmer, subsistence farmer. And now there's me. Like that's fast, right? Grandfather to grandson, rich, third, fourth, fifth richest man in the world. I don't do any farming. But that's because of the technologies I've relied on. And what I want is that no human does any farming. They're all free to have a life of creativity with whatever area they're interested in. For you, it's music and comedy. For him, it's computer science stuff. Whatever it is, you're freed up. And so usually what they propose is a base salary for everyone. So everyone's going to get 45,000. Yeah. So these guys aren't necessarily, they're not like classical libertarians or something. They would be more like they want to manage society. And so, yeah, there's no one who can't go to Whole Foods and buy healthy food anymore in our culture. No matter what your job is, you can go to Whole Foods and you can buy organic food and be healthy. That's their goal.
I hope so. I like that. because I do worry that this seems like a bad time in human history to have handed the keys of the kingdom over to the oligarchs, which it
Mhm.
certainly feels like we may well have done.
Well, also we got to. That's why it's all good for everyone to read works like Aristotle, and you'll learn the different kinds of governments, why democracy's terrible, but also why oligarchy's terrible. And you don't just get caught in the pendulum of history, like swinging back over to the oligarchs now, because they all promise us they have good intentions. But you and I started out by talking that no, we're Americans. We know no one has good intentions. They want power and money to get their own ends, and that's why we have a government that checks them.
Yeah. I like to say that sci-fi movies from the 80s got two things right. How cars would sound every time an electric car pulls away. I'm like, that's how it sounded in sci-fi movies. And
Yep.
what the bad guys would be like, because they were all like these CEO evil
Mhm.
guys that, quite frankly, I see a lot of resemblance between the people that are at the top right now and the
Yeah,
bad guys.
I just saw a review of the original 1980s RoboCop about that. How like it didn't do real well then because people thought it was just going to be a fun action sci-fi movie, but it's actually a movie about these problems, corporations putting technology in your own brain that alters your personality, and if you can ever come back from that. And so it was a
Wow.
little bit too deep for the time, the reviewer was saying, but it's exactly what we're dealing with now, where they're literally developing technologies to put them in your brain. And
Yeah,
they'll
that's
sell it with, hey,
Neuralink.
this lets you speak four languages without ever studying them. That's amazing.
Yeah. Which is kind of, I mean, even without the Neuralink, which is Elon Musk's company, and I think last I read they've got a guy that can play chess against a computer with his thoughts. So it's
Yeah. Mhm.
is that true?
Well, I've read that same thing. So yeah, you never know like how much is true, how much is not. But yeah, the one caution I would give, like about the movie villains, the who makes movies? Well, businessmen pay for them on the basis they believe this will be a good investment. But after that, they don't care too much about like it could be a movie. If it's a movie about like bears migrating and it's going to make $1 billion, that's all they care about at the end.
Right.
But the ones who write it, direct it, and are involved in the set and the message are all artists. And the artists and the businessmen are natural enemies from the beginning of civilization. They don't like each other. They got critiques of each other, which are partly valid, partly based on caricatures. So, who's is the bad guy in a movie ever going to be the beatnik artist who just enjoys thinking about deep things? Never. It's always
I
going to
like
be
that.
the
I want to
guy
write that
who's,
movie now. Make
yeah,
the beatnik the bad guy. That's
yeah.
a good twist.
It's always going to be the big business guy who's actually signing the check of the writer writing the movie because the big business guy doesn't care. He just wants to know if this is going to make money. So there's always that. And I point that out to my students because we vilify entire professions. And lawyer and business are the two main ones. Bad guys in a movie, you can go to Vegas, no one will take the bet because it's going to be a lawyer or a businessman. But the truth is, of course, there's businessmen and lawyers who aren't good, but there's also a lot of great ones, and we got a lot of
Right.
students majoring in those subjects, and we want to give them positive examples of how to be in those professions, not just always vilify them.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that is a good jumping off point to get into your Christianity and your advocacy for. I guess you believe that uh, Christianity should be more in society than it currently is, less secular society, certainly at the university level. And I've seen you make some good arguments for that.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
certainly. And look, like I said, grew up incredibly Catholic, and
Hmm.
unlike most Catholics, even though I ended up atheist in the end, I had a good experience. I didn't have a bad experience. I was an
Yeah.
altar
Well, good.
boy.
Yeah.
I knew two priests, and they were lovely guys. People are disappointed to hear that. Sorry,
Yeah.
I saw nothing wrong with them. Lovely
Yeah.
gentlemen. They turned out to be both whatever. Long story, but they turned out to both be gay, and they turns out they were lovers. And
Oh,
the Catholic
these two
Church,
guys, the same guys. Well.
yeah. And I like to say that maybe the reason that they were totally cool was that they were just living their best life
Mhm.
and not repressed. But that said, the Catholic
Yeah.
Church that I went to, and when they
Now
were
is it
found out,
Massachusetts?
Massachusetts, when which boy, Boston diocese couldn't have a more dark past than that. But
Oh.
the Boston diocese destroyed them
Hmm. Oh, it came
when they were
out.
outed. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, the so I'm a Presbyterian, which means we're the ones that take credit for the United States, specifically separation of powers, that the government and the church are two different things.
Yeah.
So in the English Reformation, we're the ones who said whether it's the Catholic Church or the Church of England, there shouldn't be a national church like that.
Right.
And the church can do its business and the state does its, and they overlap on some things and they inform each other, but they're not the same thing. That was the medieval model that both Rome and England took. And instead of that, Presbyterians said, no, these are separate things. Well, I say all that in order to say, I believe in the First Amendment. I think freedom of speech is great. We don't want a Church of America. That'd be, Presbyterians will say, no, we don't want that. But as a philosopher, really, not just as a Christian, when you say a secular, that could mean different things. But what it tends to mean now is materialist philosophy, which says we're simply animals. We're a little more advanced than the chimpanzees, not much. And we're just bodies that when you die, you stop existing. So that's what secular means. And then religion means some group that will tell you how to live. So when you die, you go to heaven. And then there's just a bunch of different versions of religion that and each of us buys into one. Oh, I'm buying into the inner peace and crystals religion about how to get to heaven. And so then it's built into that equation. The materialists in the secular world have science, and religion's just this kind of navel-gazing weird stuff that maybe you need to do to feel better about yourself. So I'm basically critiquing that model and saying that's a post-World War II model that came up, and it's kind of, it was an agreement between Christians and secularists that said, hey, we're gonna keep religion out of the public sphere. But the Christians kept their side of that. No prayer in school, no Ten Commandments, didn't press the issue. That was a case from Madeline Murray O'Hare in the 1960s. And Christians really didn't press it much. They just agreed, okay, fine, we'll take those out. But on the other side, the materialists didn't keep there. They said, no, we're going to go hardcore. All of public education is going to be materialist philosophy. And so my work is to say, hey, let's critique that agreement. Even if you're not a Christian, this is an unfair agreement. We should be able to inform students about what the Bible teaches. When I go to conferences in Europe and I meet my European colleagues, I've had a few of them make this joke. They say, hey, we're all atheists, but we know way more about the Bible because we get taught the Bible in our public school, whatever they call K through 12. You Americans all say you're Christians, 80% of you, none of you know the Bible because you don't teach your kids the Bible. So it's just this weird thing where, yeah, we should be able to teach this stuff. We agreed not to in the 1960s, but that was not a very wise agreement. It certainly hasn't been kept on the other side. So that's what I would say I'm critiquing. That doesn't mean then there's altar calls at the end of third grade, but the third grader at least knows what are the four gospels. That's pretty embarrassing to Americans. When Jay Leno used to do Man on the Street, he did one and he would ask people, had his reporter ask people, can you name the four gospels? Largely not, no.
Wow. I would absolutely agree with you that, I mean, I don't think you could understand Western civilization, Western culture without understanding it through the lens of the Bible, which is certainly was such a huge influence on us. But what you see oftentimes nowadays is people want to go through a Christian lens when they study the Bible, particularly in Christian apologetics, where perhaps if you're looking at the Old Testament, a student might have questions about some of the things that seem a little more egregious, like, owning slaves or, wiping out the Canaanites or dashing babies against the rocks or something like that. And what you'll get very often in the Christian apologetics circles is a excuse for that, a workaround. And I would say I want to keep that out of public school, obviously.
Yeah, in other words, you want it, let's say minimally you don't advocate, you're not doing, there's not Christian apologetics. Let's put it under the branch of literature. Even at our universities, up until about 1990, there used to be classes called the Bible as Literature. And I have some other textbooks because I like to collect old textbooks to see how they used to do things. And it was what you would expect. Let me give another example that is an analogy. You go into a class on the Iliad, and the whole semester is about the atrocities in the Iliad, how terrible the Greeks were. And on top of that, none of these characters are even real. They're all made up. Zeus isn't real. I'm going to spend 2 weeks convincing my class there's no Zeus. Well, wait a minute. That's just now like materialist apologetics. You can study the Iliad and you don't need to be reminded Zeus is not real. You don't need to be reminded like, hey, should the Greeks be going to war like this? Look at this, the war atrocities they're committing. you don't do that in a great books class. You just want to know, what's the book about? What's the conflict? What's the narrative that's motivating it? So we used to do that with the Bible. It kind of flipped at the same time universities became more and more political. I trace that back to around the 90s. And I think we can reclaim that. So the student's not told one way or the other. The student's not told, hey, in Genesis class, we're going to also do materialist cosmology, just so you don't start to think Moses was right about this stuff. Well, you don't do that in the Iliad class, right? Just teach what's it say? What's it about?
Yeah. I mean, I know that is a critique very often, is how quote unquote woke universities have become. And since I never really went to a university, I told you I went to Berklee College of Music, and that was back in the early 90s. This is not something I would know anything about. That is something that I would imagine you would know quite a bit about. Do you see that as detrimental to the students? It seems to me that there is a difference the way people raise their kids in general. Helicopter parenting. I know every parent is tracking their kids nonstop on their phone. They want to be involved in all their business nonstop. My mother literally opened the door on a summer day, said, "Get out, come back when it's dinner time." And the things I did, oh my. I mean, just we rode our bikes anywhere we want.
Anywhere you could,
all sorts of trouble. I played on the train tracks. I'm not proud of that, but as like a kid, my friends and I would play on the train tracks and things like that.
Yeah, similar thing. We lived for a big part of my youth. We lived in Colorado, where I had access to wilderness, and I'd just be, hey, school's out. See you dinner time at 6, and I'm out there like my mom doesn't know is a bear got me. Am I climbing trees and falling off? No idea. No worries either. She didn't sit at home worrying like a parent now would just be in anxiety the whole time. Like, I'm letting my kid have some freedom, but I'm tortured. So what you bring up is really good because, there's always the rhetoric. These are woke universities. My Substack's more about the evidence of it. I don't just write opinion pieces. There's my opinion in my articles, but they're usually around something that happened, which goes under the category of being woke. So real quick example, at my faculty meetings since COVID, we've had to sit through a reading of a Native American land acknowledgement. So the first, however long it takes, 5 minutes. And they even used to say, now let's bow our heads and close our eyes for the reading. And I object. I was like, wait a minute. Those are religious postures. I'm not going to bow my head and close my eyes. And I've objected to this because it's a political movement. If you want to look it up, you can look up Native American land acknowledgements. It's very consciously Marxist about problematizing American land ownership. So it's not a neutral thing. It's not just about, hey, we like the local tribe. So I've objected and said, look, these are faculty meetings. They're about our budget and our class schedules. Why are we doing this? And they said, well, we're going to. So I said, okay, well then, if we're going to do readings and we value inclusion, one of ASU's mottos is inclusive excellence. We want to be excellent at inclusion. Then I'm going to propose my own reading. I have a settler capitalist land reading. So this is not either or. You can read that one, and then I'll read my settler capitalist, where we thank the capitalist investors who are really the ones that made our campus possible monetarily right now. And it was unanimous no. We're only reading one, and it's going to be the Native American one. We're not going to do this one. Now, that's at the same time that ASU wants investors. We have a huge microchip plant being built in North Phoenix, and ASU's super excited about all the capitalist money it's going to bring in. But they won't thank them in a faculty meeting. And that's because of the philosophical framework of the faculty, right? They would view capitalism just equals the villain because they grew up on these 80s movies. It's always bad. Right. If you do the money with them and show how their salary directly traces to capitalist investments, doesn't matter. In their mind, their job could just appear out of non-being and be funded by the fairies. They don't need to know how they get their money. And so that when we say woke, there's, of course, like a media spin on it to get people's eyes on news articles. But then there's the reality, which is, certain political positions, it's not just that they're debated. That's fine. I've told people I'll debate any professor at ASU, all of them at once, as the only conservative. Let's have a public debate. It'd be good for our students to see us.
Are you truly the only
interact.
Conservative?
What?
Are you truly the only conservative professor at ASU?
Not literally, but we have 7,000 faculty, and I can name the conservatives on two hands.
Wow. We
had a last November, not this year, but the previous year, the College Fix, which is a conservative like online news source. They did a survey at ASU among faculty. I think they surveyed 3,000 faculty. 97% of the faculty self-identified as left or far left. and now that 3% is left, some of them were like independent. I don't want to tell you. So it wasn't all like, oh, we're Barry Goldwater conservatives, the last 3%. No, it was like 1% said I'm a Republican. And so that's a problem just from a hiring perspective. You don't get those numbers with open, fair hiring. We would know that about any profession. If you heard there's a profession that only has Republicans, you'd say, so, okay, wait a minute. Is it a public job? Yes, it's a public job that takes public money. There's only Republicans. How'd that happen? But here we turn a blind eye to it for decades. And it doesn't make any sense from the public perspective, the public goods you were mentioning, because conservatives need to have places they can go to have professors also. They don't need to think to themselves, hey, I want the affordability of a state school for my kid. He wants to be an engineer. You got to go to university for that. You can't just do a trade. But I know every single professor is going to be driving home a leftist message. That's not right for the population.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. But my first thought was, but at the same time, particularly in the evangelical movement in America, they want professors that teach something counter to what science says or what reality says. They would like their geology professor to teach that the earth is 6,000 years old and that Noah's flood literally happened. And I don't think that's reasonable to say our tax dollars should go to teaching misinformation.
So, well, that's always the first one. Whenever I bring this up, if I get a faculty member to interact, your example is the first one. Like when I talk about free speech, because I defended Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager being able to speak at ASU as part of free speech. Yeah. And the faculty who were opposed to them said, no, they can't speak. They're white nationalist bigots, and we don't let white nationalist bigots speak. I was able to tell Dennis Prager, a well-known Jewish intellectual, hey, the ASU professors think you're a white nationalist. He was like, yeah, that's a new one for me. So it's just as a way of censoring the conservatives to give them that label.
That's true.
I think this is another one. I understand your fear, but I think it's a little bit of a misnomer, because you're going to find that any evangelical university has a hard time finding geologists who are six-day creationists. So the problem isn't that the public universities would have this flood of them. It's that if there is a school, like in SoCal, Biola is a very famous one, they have a hard time finding geologists who aren't old Earth. And so this fear on the left that there's like this huge multitude of Christian scientists who are just waiting to get in there and teach some ancient, this is not reality. That's kind of fear. But on the other side, I'm always open to having debates. And so I think that would be a good one to debate. The young people are questioning everything. And some of the things are somewhat preposterous, but at the same, like was Winston Churchill the bad guy? But at the same time, why they're questioning is because they've been so abused. Their trust has been so abused. These are usually people growing up under COVID. And they just say, and then maybe they watch The Matrix one too many times. And they say, I don't know what to believe. Maybe everyone's lying to me. Well, the solution to that is not to tell them stop questioning. The solution to that is to give them the proof. And so I say to my astronomy colleagues, if you got a flat earther come in and give an hour-long presentation, you might say, well, that's not advancing my astronomy. No, but then you get to show why we know the earth is a sphere. Because it's not just because your first grade teacher told you that. All of us can figure that out. That's not advanced calculus. Most of us humans have the ability to figure out the science and the mathematics behind the earth as a sphere. And so what we've done is we've created a set of students who don't know that. They'll tell you the earth is a sphere. They don't know how to prove that or why we think that. And so it gets lumped into conspiracy theories about the government's trying to control our beliefs about the shape of the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. But my pushback there would be that I wouldn't want a person in a position of authority. If you brought a flat earther in, and by the way, Charlie Kirk, Dennis Prager, I mean, I'm a free speech absolutist, and I know that you've taught on the First Amendment as well. I'd be curious if you are as well. That I say let them all speak. I've never come across a person whose opinion I didn't think they had the right to express.
Yeah, and debate, because speech is. I also just add into that the speech is public debate. So it's not just mouthing off. Now, I'm for not having restrictions on mouthing off, because what you don't want in First Amendment is a person in charge who gets to decide what counts as mouthing off, because then he'll say the views he doesn't agree with are the ones, hey, that's just mouthing off. You can't talk. But the main thing the First Amendment is protecting is political debate. King George or whoever can't tell you to stop having political debates. And so that's why I would just one up free speech to say, let's have even more of it. You want to debate flat earth? Yeah, I'll debate you on that. I'm going to give the proof in the diagram so our audience knows how they can prove the earth is a sphere. I'm not afraid of that. And so I think that's like it's like the solution to some of these conspiracy theories is more public debate, not getting scared and hunkering down.
Absolutely. I'm for
Mhm.
public debate, but somebody needs to have the prerequisite credentials in order to teach geology or whatever class it would be. That, I mean, if you can get somebody who's got the prerequisite credentials, and I'm not sure what a level professor would have to have,
Yeah.
that does believe the earth is flat, then maybe there's an argument to be had. But pretending that this
Yeah, you
kid
got to go
who
through
watched a million YouTube videos is on the
it.
same
Yeah.
footing as the scientist, that's where
Mhm.
the debate becomes, or at least the framing of the debate is not realistic, and it needs to
Yeah,
be.
I think that's true. And one like under many circumstances, what you said is true, which is we have expert credentialing. That's what I had to go through, both to get a PhD, then to get tenure, then to get promoted to full professor. You got to go through your peers evaluate you. That's a great system. But the worry for the young people is even that system can get hijacked, and they think it has been hijacked, so that now the credentialing system is not fair anymore, and it doesn't bring in the best at making their case and arguing. It brings in the best yes men, and so now we have a whole system of yes men who keep geologists who doubt the system out, and so they have to watch YouTube videos. That's all they're given because the system says you're not good enough, you can't be in our debate. And so if that is true, and I think the statistics show us 97% of faculty far left, there's good reason to think that's true. Then the system needs to have checks and balances put back in. It's become the very monopoly you're worried about for AI, and we should be. What's happened in the industry? It's the educational industrial complex, and tens of millions and billions of dollars have been used to give student loans out to make these universities grow on the premise that you need a university education to have a good life. And Americans for decades have bought into that myth. You need an education to have a good life, and have gone into debt. And so if we follow the money trail, at first, the first guy we see is, you'll say, oh, this is just a well-intentioned liberal professor. He's so nice. He drives a Volvo. He lives within his means. He gives to some charities. Yes, but those are 10,000 of those are hired. What's the money behind the system? That's what you want to trace. And it's money making a ton of money off of guaranteed loans that you can't even get out of with bankruptcy. It'll still be there after bankruptcy. So there's a whole system that we have to question. It's not just the flat earth geologist. I'm using him because I think that's preposterous. One of my favorite conversations with one of my kids, he was 3. So give him a break. He's a great kid now. He's a very intellectual kid, but he's 3 years old. He's on my shoulders. I don't know why, but he asked me, Dad, what's the shape of the earth? I said, well, it's a sphere. And he said, no, I don't think it is. And I said, yeah, it is. He said, well, look in front of us. It's flat. And he had never heard. He's 3 years old. He's not on YouTube. He didn't hear any flat. He's just a little empiricist, because he's right. It sure looks flat when you look ahead of us. And so I
Yep.
said, well, it's a huge sphere. So from our little perspective, it seems like it's flat. But if you zoom out, and he's like, no, I think it's flat, Dad. And I thought this is really clever because he's just being genuine, and he's just being a pure empiricist. My explanation required abstractions that go outside of empirical realm. And he's saying, I don't trust your abstractions. I trust my eyes. So I thought that was really like, I thought, yeah, what he
Yeah.
needs is a better proof than just abstractions. And now no one needs to worry. He believes the earth is a sphere. He's not a conspiracy kid. But that's why I bring it up. He was 3 years old, and he's just operating out of his senses.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now, before we continue, I asked for an hour of your time.
Mhm.
Do you got to go?
Yeah, we could keep talking. At least like we could start to wrap it up in one sense of there's a lot of loose threads still. Your audience might wonder, how does all this tie together?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
But I'm not in a rush. I'm not like signing off in 2 seconds or anything. So yeah.
okay. I mean, you talk about empirical evidence. I did see you
Mhm.
say that you believe that the existence of God is provable through.
Mhm.
Did you say empirical
Yeah.
evidence? I can't remember your exact words, but something along the lines where it's undeniable.
Yeah. Well, it's not without the senses. So it's not like in a pure rationalist void, like you don't need to have any senses, but it's not empirical in the sense of induction alone, which is never going to give you a sound argument about anything. It's always going to leave open. You conclude all crows are black, but you haven't seen the next crow who's an albino crow. So you're always going to have that problem with induction.
Right.
But yeah, real quick to transition from the previous conversation to this one is There's also most of geology classes and astronomy classes don't have any room for origins. So we think it like that's all they're talking about in geology. Not really. There's a whole bunch of science you need to know, which has to do with the present or within human memory that has nothing to do with origins. So even when we talk about a geologist, maybe he's a 6-day creationist, it's a tiny sliver, or maybe not in the class at all, because that's just not what the class is about. So also one other proposal I have is just, yeah, keep the classes actually empirical, because anything that happened outside of human memory is not empirical. So that only puts us back, to 3000 BC. After that, you're doing some non-empirical space. I don't mean that to mean it's false, because I'm a philosopher, not a scientist, but we just need to be honest with the kind of data we're dealing with. And so I think we could also be more clear about that in the university and say, we do have a class on origins, but this class isn't that class. And so we're actually talking about stratification of rock levels and what that means for plate tectonics right now, right? There's nothing to do
Right.
with origins. And astronomy is very similar. You can do all kinds of
Sort of the
astronomy.
argument, to be in the terms that I understand, sounds like the argument that we can't prove that time worked the way it did previously, which I've heard
Well, that's
creationists
one,
say
yeah.
many times.
Yeah, my first published article. So when you're trying to get tenure, that's a big deal. You're like, come on, I need published articles. Was about the philosophy of Charles Lyell, because Charles Lyell is the geologist in the early 1800s who developed what's called uniformitarianism. And then when you read Darwin, he quotes Charles Lyell like every other page, because what Charles Lyell did was gave Darwin the time needed for evolution to work, or at least Darwin thought so. And so uniformitarianism is a philosophical claim that the past always worked in the way we see it operating today. And because of that, if we see that something today takes 10 hours, we can project back that thing, into infinity. That must have taken this long. Like, how long would it take to develop a human from random chance? Billions of years. Okay, well then there must have been billions of years because there are humans in front of you. So yeah, I think there's some important philosophical critiques there. I linked it to a philosopher named David Hume just before Lyell, also Scottish, and his philosophy of causation and empiricism. So I think though those are really that's a class I've taught before, philosophy of science. And again, that doesn't mean you're coming down on the side of Moses, but it does mean you're at least bringing to students' attention, hey, what you're talking about right now is a philosophical position, not a purely empirical one.
Interesting. I mean, we're outside of my pay grade at this point. So these are interesting arguments. I mean, my only thought is, why is that not convincing to the majority of the people with advanced degrees in these subjects?
Yeah, so take what we've both agreed at the beginning of our podcast that we're Americans, and a core American value is people are corrupt. Minimally corruptible, probably a little bit corrupt also on what they do. But I think as a good kid of the 80s, you've nevertheless mostly just limited that to businessmen and lawyers. And you would say doctors on ER and professors, they're exempt. Well, no, they think in herds also. The same book about crowd control that applies to the business world applies to the professional world in philosophers or professors. They care about what their peers say. They don't want to be made to look like a fool. If they question certain things, they'll be laughed out of their societies. And so there's all that same pressure. On top of that, I want to get $20 million government grants. I'm going to do whatever those only fund certain things. They don't fund this. And you have to have these assumptions because the people in the government who look at the grants are previous professors with their own opinions. So there's a whole system set up to protect one philosophy and then make the other one sound laughable. And yet we've been conditioned to say, yeah, but professors, they just care about the truth. They just seek out the truth in every setting. Well, why do we do that? We're Americans. We don't trust experts. We want some kind of critique on that system. And that's what I'm proposing is just we've taken out those critiques. Let's put those back into the system.
Yeah, for sure. Although it does seem to me that if you could overturn the apple cart in any given science, you would become incredibly rich and incredibly famous and win the Nobel Prize.
Only if there's like a direct technology, probably. But like,
yeah,
the guy who like says, hey, I think maybe Moses is right. Well, we've got a few of those around the country at Christian universities, so it's not going to make you famous enough to say you're making money. And plus there's no like direct technological application. So yeah, there's certain things you can question. I mean, I think that's one of the American myths that writers rely on. Like it's interesting for people if they ask an AI, like, tell me the plots of American universe of movies or TV shows. We'll think, well, it must be like infinite. The diversity must be amazing. And there's only like 8 plots,
Yeah,
right? It's
it's
not very
true.
many. It's just repeated over and over, and you'll find out most of them, probably all 8 of them, were just from Shakespeare, but he
Yeah.
got it
And
from
the
other
biggest
people.
ones are all just the hero's journey, just
Yeah, the
over
hero's
and
journey, the
over and over
monomyth.
and over again.
Yep, over and over. That's right. I've worked on that too, the use of the monomyth in our culture, because yeah, you're right, and I think that then makes us think, well, the professors, that's Luke Skywalker. He just wants the truth. The businessmen are Darth Vader. He's a bad guy. He just wants to control other people. And we need to throw everyone back in the mix of saying, no, we've all got the need for some critique in our life, some checks and balances in our life. And professors can also organize in a way that protects their narrative from critique. Because although we're not becoming billionaires in humanities, some of our science colleagues can do really well. There's always debates about who owns that material they make. Like, does the university own it or do they own it? Especially in pharmacology,
Right.
that's a big one if you're going into it. But we're not going to be super rich, but we do have what others would consider an easy life, a creative life of writing and talking to students. You've got a retirement package. You've got health care. There's motivation to protect that kind of life.
Yeah. It seems to me that most of the Christians who have a different take on, say, whatever it is, physics, geology, or whatnot, that, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that they start with the conclusion and then work backwards, which seems antithetical to the scientific
Yeah,
method, though. So
that'd be the
wouldn't that
critique.
be
Yeah, say,
yeah, you agree with that?
well, if you're doing science, then yeah, that's a critique of science. If you're doing theology, then no, that's how you work, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean theology doesn't have proofs, but it has rational and argument proofs, not empirical proofs. But if you're doing just empirical discovery, that's true. However, there's lots of useful books on this, beginning with Thomas Kuhn, his book about the structure of scientific revolutions. I think that was in '60s, and that's like a standard book to read to see how there's not a truth seeker. You're within a philosophy. So this person who says, I'm just going to go with the truth wherever it follows, this layer of rock looks like it's a billion years old to me. Well, he's not aware of, and nor was he ever taught, that he's absorbed the philosophy of Charles Lyell. Doesn't know who that is. Maybe he knows about geological studies, but not the philosophy of causation and time. And so the empiricist is not as empirical as he thinks he is. He's got all these philosophical assumptions that he's using to interpret what he sees, or she. And so that's what I do as a philosopher, is bring those to the awareness. It might turn out they're true. Just bringing it up to awareness doesn't even mean you're saying it's false. It just means, hey, did you notice you're operating on this assumption? How do you know if that's true or not? However, my experience has been it comes down to blind faith for them. So they'll love to make fun of the theologian. But when I say, how do you know time works like this? I just believe it. I have to believe that to make sense of the rest of my system.
Is that truly what they say, though, that I just
That's
believe
been
it?
my
It
experience.
seems to me that they would say that there's at least a record of time having always worked that way, and that the laws of physics would dictate it. Time is a weird one because time actually isn't universal. Obviously, as you get closer to a
Yeah.
massive object, it slows down. As you get closer to the speed of light, it
Yeah.
changes time. So
Yep. Yeah. So they might start with that. So, but again, and this is my experience. I haven't done a scientific poll,
right.
so it's anecdotal only. But yeah, my experience is they might start and say that. But what you're pointing out is that we only have 5,000 years of humans telling us that's what they observed, and actually only 100 years of humans telling us that's what they observed with radioactive things, because that's the basis for most of the aging. So 100 years from there, you're saying it seems like it's always worked this way for 100 years, but you're asking us to believe in tens of billions of years. That's a statistical jump that no insurance agent would ever take. And that's
I
what they
would
tell me.
believe.
I know, but I have to believe this. I have to believe this for my system. I say, okay, I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that's what they call blind faith.
Right. But when you put all the pieces together, they certainly add up. Uh, the model works, whereas
Okay, so as a philosopher, now you're a pragmatist, not an empiricist. Truth
well,
is
I don't know
whatever
what I am.
works.
I'll allow you to identify me.
Well, so let's say you're a scientist talking to me who believes that they're just following the empirical data, but then they tell me truth is what works. That's not an empirical. You don't discover that principle empirically. That's the philosophy of John Dewey and the American pragmatist, and that's 100% what governs our university. I've had interactions with our president, and he's told me I'm an American pragmatist. I just want to do degrees that work, that get students jobs, that advance American interests. So it's like, yeah, that's the pragmatist, but reality might not conform to it. It might be that you empirically study reality and it doesn't work. So again, that's where I'm saying people are coming to their empirical studies with assumptions like reality must work. Where'd you get that from? That's not empirical.
Interesting.
And some sci-fi explores that, it explores the limits of human cognition about reality, and those are really good terror movies if they do it right, because that's terrifying. It's what the terror of Lovecraft is about. It's a little bit sci-fi also, but it's not a scary monster that we have to overcome like in Marvel. It's something beyond human cognition itself. You don't even know what it is, nor could anyone tell you. And I think that's where I think you have real terror movies. That's scary. In other words, and it's the opposite of what you were just saying. Reality works. Those are based on it doesn't, and we get to some part of deep space, and we encounter something, and it's not like an alien latched onto the ship, and you just got to shoot them off the ship. It's like blows your mind. Like, what is this thing? So that's a philosophical assumption people bring to science. It must work. We'll figure it out. I call that the Star Trek philosophy.
Interesting. Although I know that when we look into the deep recesses of space, we can calculate the movement of the stars and the exoplanets that we can now see around them using the laws of physics as we understand them. It all seems to work as far away as we can see, that the universe does seem to have a universality. I don't know if I've butchered that word or not, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So that's interesting because, again, what I would encourage people to do is to look at what they actually have. So they'll tell you what you just said. No one has ever seen, I'll even say this, a star. We see points of light. No one's seen one of these exoplanets. They're reasoning to an exoplanet based on the motion of the light of the star. But that process of reasoning is not itself simply empirical. Like if you look through a telescope and you can see a planet, that's empirical. The only question you have is if the telescope is doing something to make you see it, which is one of the questions they raise about Galileo and the moons of Jupiter. No, that must be dust on the lens of the telescope. It's not really moon. So you got to get past all that. Here, this is an exoplanet. But I would just encourage people to look into what they actually have, because when you see pictures in the media of a star with a planet, that's completely made up. That's an artist. That's in your realm. That's an artist. Or black holes, or any of these things. Just say, what do we have empirically? And it's a lot less than people think. And I think that's enough for people to go on in our setting to say, yeah, I just want to know, what do you actually have? You got one telescope pointing in that direction with this amount of information. And from that, you want me to conclude a universal. We wouldn't do that at Vegas. We wouldn't do that in an insurance company. Why are you asking me to do that here?
Interesting stuff. I guess I'll simply close on, and I hope this isn't too large of a question, but as a philosopher, it seems to me that we don't operate off of philosophical proofs. It doesn't seem to me there's one thing in the entire world that we accept actually exists in which we consider a philosophical proof to be sufficient. I often think about the Higgs boson, where I'm like, they had that mathematically that it worked. The equations all indicated there must be this particle, the subatomic particle, and it still wasn't good enough for science to say it actually existed. They had to build a Large Hadron Collider and actually get empirical proof that it existed. So when it comes to the philosophy of religion, it seems to me that we don't rely on philosophical proofs for anything that actually exists. And so it's a bridge too far for me to say, because of philosophical proofs, I want you to believe the most incredible thing anyone has ever conceived of, which is a creator.
Yeah, I think, and that's actually what we were talking about. I kind of took us back to geology, because you asked that previously about proving God exists. So that's a good topic kind of as we wrap up, to say, yeah, you're right in one sense, because you can find a philosopher who believes anything. So like you say, look, if philosophy is so successful, why is there a bazillion schools of philosophy and they're all teaching different stuff? And a lot of it sure seems like it's way out there. Now, it just happens I'm right now working on a paper about things like the Higgs boson It's a philosophy of science paper, because that's another good example. Like I said to you and your audience, ask what empirical evidence do we have? Ask that about those things also. Because when you start to get into what are particles, when I use the word particle, you probably think of a tiny little billiard ball. No, they're mathematical points. They don't take up any space. So they
Right.
can speak in physics of things that are material but massless.
Yeah.
That
Probability.
sounds like a big problem logically. If your material, it might be very small, but you have some mass. You take up some space. And then the same thing with fields. Fields are just lots of these particles mathematically. And they can do things like vibrate and transfer energy, but with no friction of any kind. Like if you had a violin string and you pluck it, it stops eventually because of friction.
Right.
But these things are mathematical entities, meaning there's no friction in mathematics. But then they've asked us to then also believe these map onto reality. So one of my arguments in the paper will be the Higgs boson and similar experiments are simply circular because they said the math proves this, and then they set it up so the math will come out, and they said, see, the math proved it. Well, okay, but you need to set up a possibly falsifiable experiment, not one that has your mathematics built in. And on top of that, the philosophical problem of we can't add up a bunch of particles that have no space to equal space around us. 0 plus 0 plus 0 to infinity still equals 0. So this is a tension. One of the points of my article, one of it is just to bring this philosophical problems to people's attention. But the second one is just to say this tension's been there in philosophy from the beginning. Philosophy meaning human intellectual endeavors. So one of who you'd relate with is Pythagoras, because although he's a mathematician, he's also a musician. And he believes that all of reality is mathematical because music is mathematical and all of reality is music. And his line of thinking is still the line, I think, that we're seeing scientists working in today, which is that if the mathematics proves it, although we need a proof of some kind, the proofs that we give have to be empirical proofs, not mathematical arguments. In other words, how would you falsify this?
Right.
Now, let me give a quick example. The experiment with the light coming around the sun. It's either going to confirm Einstein or Newton. And it does bend in a way that says Einstein. Okay, that's a little bit falsifiable. However, it's a positive conclusion. Empirical scientists can't give positive conclusions. They can only give negative ones. It disproved Newton's valuation of force. But it might be that you could do a Newtonian solution that just has certain forces altered.
Yeah.
It doesn't
You're talking
guarantee
about
the
lensing.
Einstein solution is true.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll close on this though, that you make such great arguments, and it just reaffirms to me that there's so much left to know, and that the conclusion is a big question mark.
Well,
And
that's
that,
part of the fun. Yeah.
yeah, but the religious person says, no, the conclusion is a creator. Whereas I say, why not just leave that question mark in place until we
Yeah.
have that proof?
So let me give a kind of brief overview, because I keep answering with science stuff because I want to distinguish science and theology and show how there's some similarities going on, but I haven't directly answered the question about God. So the thing you're identifying, I call fideism. Fideism is blind belief. And many people, when they bring up fideism, they immediately think of the theologian. And there certainly are fideistic Christians and fideistic theologians. But part of why I've been answering the way I have is to show I know, but there's also fideistic materialists who are materialists, and they're telling you they're doing science, but they're just at the base, they're fideistically believing their assumptions. So as a philosopher, I'm opposed to all fideism. Now, how do we prove that God exists? Well, the first step is this: define your word. So one of the things we do in class, one of the first lessons we go over is 10 or 12 different definitions of the word God. So, for example, if you go to the Catholic Church, you get one definition. But if you go to Sedona, which is a city in Arizona dedicated to New Age teaching, you're going to get a whole different. They don't mean what Thomas Aquinas meant. They mean like the universal energy behind all things or something.
They mean the light that comes through a crystal. And
yeah. Well, they use they love physics. They don't get it right. It's pop level physics, but they always justify their beliefs. Well, quartz crystal has energy. We use it in our watches. Therefore, it's connecting to your soul through energy. So they always try to use that language. Yeah. But I think that if we're trying to prove God the creator, so theistic religions like Christianity, the proof is first just what is God. So God's not material. the classical word is spirit, but in our language, that kind of means like a thing that floats down the hallway. It means conscious, but not material. And so you're asking, could there have been a being that existed from eternity who is conscious but not material, in contrast to, well, what are the other views? So I think what you end up doing is you have kind of a tree graph of the possibilities. There's not very many possibilities. There's more than two, but there's not a million. And you can use logic to eliminate what's impossible. In fact, I quote that there was a time period, it's over now. There was a time period where all my students were in love with Sherlock. And so I could quote him. I've always liked Sherlock Holmes before Benedict Cumberbatch came along. But he said, we must eliminate the impossible, and whatever we're left with, however much it's improbable, it must be the truth. Yep. And so that's really logic. That's geometry. That's where I first learned the laws of logic, was in my high school geometry class. I had a great teacher because she took time to go over the laws of logic. That's how we can do geometry. So I think the approach to that kind of question, by organizing our mind around the options and understanding how logic works, we can eliminate at least what's impossible.
Yeah, but my pushback on that would be, we don't fully know what is the possible just yet. And to kind of bookend this whole thing, AI certainly presents, and not that this is a new idea, but the idea that we could just be the creation of just a supercomputer. Or
yeah, that's right. I go through that.
The Brahmin said, we are the dreams of the gods, or are the gods the dreams of man?
You brought up, you're 100% right, because the idea that we're in a matrix is from Brahmanic philosophy. Not, it's like some new thing. They don't teach a materialist computer matrix, but yeah, this idea that we're all in the dream of Brahman. In fact, I tell my students that you were raised as Brahmanists, or Vedantists is what I say, because you were in your crib, someone's saying to you, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 merrily. Why? Life is but a dream. Yeah, so I think when I say impossible, what I mean is something like a direct logical contradiction, not just something that's what I think Holmes is getting at when he said, eliminate the impossible and whatever is left, however improbable. So the improbable is what's hard for me to believe, but it could happen.
Right.
The impossible is something like a direct contradiction. There's a circle that has edges or four corners.
Right.
But a circle means no corners. So you have an object that both has corners and doesn't have corners at the same time, in the same respect. Well, there aren't any of those.
Right.
You don't need a NASA mission to Mars to find that out.
Isn't that called the law of non-contradiction?
Yeah.
Exactly. Man, we could just go all day.
It's been fun. This has been a lot of fun.
And I'd have
this
you
is the
back
kind of conversation
anytime.
I love, because you downplayed yourself a little bit. You shouldn't do that, because you got music background, cognitive background, but you're up to speed on stuff. And so this is the kind of long form conversation I know my students really like watching. So I'll be recommending this, and I'm glad we connected, because I love to talk again.
Yeah. And I love the idea that you're interested in comedy. Maybe next time I come to Phoenix, I got my opening act.
No, please. Yeah. Send me a message about it. And then you could be my mentor. I'll run my stand-up bit by you.
Yeah, and as far as philosophy goes, you absolutely could be my mentor. Dr. Owen Anderson, what an absolute pleasure it was talking to you. I look forward to our future conversations. You want to remind everyone where they can find you one more time?
Yeah, just look me up on X or Substack as Dr. Owen Anderson. You'll see my picture. And if you want to ask me any questions from this, send me a message. I'll be happy to talk with your audience.
All right. Thanks again.